to me, it's being able to identify what makes you excited about life, or what do you think that if you got involved would give you a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction for having been involved, that would give you a feeling of having purpose in life, that would give you a feeling of satisfaction for having been born. That, of course, it could be martial arts, it could be, who knows what. You have to pick it out. But at the same time, a passion is what makes you stand out, because it takes you and evolves you to a higher level because of the amount of effort and energy you put into it versus a person who doesn't have the passion. It's like the person who is a gold medalist person who's doing the same kind of art but isn't a gold medalist. They're both doing the same thing, but one person has a passion for it, and therefore it takes them to a higher level because they're driven, because it's that kind of emotional importance. Whereas a lot of other people, they just enjoy doing it, but they don't have a passion. So, passion is a tricky word, but to me, it's an important part of, especially martial arts, to be like a champion. You have to have a passion for it, which means you get involved in the emotional side of training rather than just the physical side of training. And I'm a very emotional person, but not emotion that I lose control of. I'm very much in control of my emotions, but it's very focused, very linear, all moving to be happy.
Welcome to Get After It. My name is John Kay, and I am a professional musician, record producer, and lifestyle entrepreneur. In each episode of Get After It, I talk with an inspiring person with a powerful message to help you discover how to realize your true potential and become your most authentic self through positive intention and purposeful action. I'm truly grateful to those of you listening right now. So without further ado, let's get after it. My guest today is a person who has forged a tremendous legacy of continued learning and study, of personal growth and shared wisdom, and the betterment of others. The individuals and organizations whom his teachings have influenced and empowered are legion. At the risk of boring him and our other two interview attendees to sleep, I'll offer a brief background. James W. DeMile was born in 1935 in San Francisco, and much of his childhood was spent in an orphanage. An attitude of survival of the fittest, along with the ability to overcome any situation, either psychologically or physically, developed during those years. He got into a lot of trouble as a youth, never making it out of ninth grade, and at a judge's discretion joined the U.S. Air Force in hope of focusing his energy in a more positive direction. DeMile became the heavyweight champion of the Air Force for 2 years and found his aggressiveness as a street fighter worked well in the boxing ring, going undefeated and winning 128 fights. But it was after the Air Force in 1959 when DeMile began attending Edison Technical School in Seattle that his life would change forever. That was when he met Bruce Lee. DeMile first saw Bruce Lee on stage performing a kung fu demonstration. Bruce at that time was building a group. He was looking for guys who were seasoned street fighters, with each member bringing very different skills to the table. Bruce wanted to pit his kung fu against them to find out what worked and what didn't. In return, Bruce would teach them Wing Chun so he would have people to train with. There were 3 other members in the group when DeMile joined. Bruce taught them what worked and with their help started modifying traditional Wing Chun, analyzing techniques, breaking them down to their simplest form and making them as effective as physically possible. In the decades since, DeMile has adapted Bruce's modification of the ancient art of Wing Chun and created Wing Chun Do, a practical self-defense system. DeMile, now known as Sijo, which means founder, has written many articles for national and international martial arts and defense magazines and written 4 best-selling martial art books, as well as produced a number of training videos, including Bruce Lee's 1 and 3-inch power punch. Sijo has also traveled extensively throughout the world, teaching his dynamic self-defense concepts and techniques to students, police, and the military, and even NFL football teams. Last year, Sijo entrusted the Wing Chun Do system to a new grandmaster, my instructor, Rocco Ambrose, who happens to be seated to my right, and with him is Black Belt Curtis from the Ambrose Academy School of Wing Chun Do. And Sijo has moved his primary focus to informing and shaping the personal growth and development personal growth and development elements of training in Wing Chun Do, elements which will improve students' lives and relationships far beyond self-defense. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great honor and privilege to introduce to you a true living legend in the world of martial arts, the founder of the Wing Chun Do system, and the man my instructor calls the most intelligent human in martial arts today, the singular Sijo James DeMile. Sijo.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you said living legend. You know, when people talk about legends, very often they're not around. So I appreciate that.
Of course. How's life been treating you?
Oh, it's treating me good. You know, I mean, here in Detroit, it's a little cold, so I'm a little chilly and wearing clothes that I normally don't wear, since in Hawaii it's about 80 degrees and not, having to worry about turning on the heat. So, but it's beautiful today, and I'm really happy to be here and being able to visit my old friends, as well as teach a few techniques that I have to people that are interested in getting a little more out of life. So
excellent.
I'm excited about it.
And to that point, you're here today because you're visiting Michigan and Ohio to conduct personal development and Wing Chun Do related seminars. If you don't mind, please explain to our audience what your seminars aim to achieve and why you've traveled all the way from Hawaii to share your wisdom.
Well, a great part of it is that, when people think of martial arts, it's mainly physical. And they don't really realize how important it is to understand the power of the mind and how the power of the mind can help them become much more effective in martial arts itself. Not only just for self-defense, but just for physical development and just being healthier and feel good about life physically. But they don't really have techniques on how to deal with the mind-body part of martial arts. So what I want to introduce them to is the simplicity of accessing the powers that they already possess, along with some simpler techniques to be able to get more out of their martial arts, but not only getting more physically, we'll say, progressive in speed and power and just technique, but also in ways that will every day help them learn faster, learn better, get more out of their training by understanding how to focus on their training, how to simplify exercises and ways to approach training that are normally not taught in the martial arts. So it's just a mind-body approach to martial arts that normally people don't get an access to.
Excellent, excellent. And how often do you travel and do these?
Well, I don't travel very much anymore because of physical problems. I've had 5 back surgeries, and so it's hard for me to travel. But this is a special time for me, of course, with the Ambrose Academy being the flagship of Wing Chun Do. But also I have many friends that I've known for many, many years that I enjoy getting together with and visiting, as well as training. And also Chris Blanky, who was down in Toledo, who was a student and a friend. He's primarily in jiu-jitsu, and his students never really get exposed to a lot of the principles that Wing Chun Do students do, as far as core principles of that Bruce taught. So this is where, when I'm here in Detroit, I find that it's just a lot of personal satisfaction to come and visit versus just going somewhere and doing a seminar. It's usually kind of boring because it's always the same thing over and over again. What did Bruce eat? It's just stupid questions.
Right. And on that subject, I've consciously tried to avoid as many questions about Bruce Lee as possible. I wanted to be talking about you today, which is fantastic. When you were here last year and conducted similar seminars, I was fortunate to attend an additional ceremony during which you entrusted the Wing Chun Do system to my instructor, Sigong Rocco. 3 questions.
Sure.
When did you first recognize that he had something special about him? And then I'll ask you the next 2.
Well, you train a lot of people that are good physically. They work hard. They're very serious. They're very committed to what they do. But there's always a certain level that they reach, and they never pass it because they're mainly physical. They're very interested in having a good club. They work hard to make their students good. But at the same time, there isn't created within that club a feeling of sort of family. In other words, it's not just psychological, it's also emotional. There's a bonding, there's a togetherness. And every school that I've gone into, that was always lacking. But I long ago found that when I went to the Ambrose Academy, that not only because of Rocco, but also because of Elizabeth. And people don't understand that relationship an instructor has to very often their spouse or somebody that's close to them who helps them grow, who helps them create an atmosphere in a way that is different than most instructors. By that, I simply mean that, like my wife, she has a different approach to martial arts and dealing with the students than I do. I'm a physical instructor. I can talk to them a lot about maybe problems. There's a lot of things that I can do from a male perspective. But I find that in order to create a positive atmosphere that is really more balanced, you need to have somebody who is not really different, but looks at everything you do in a different way.
Complementary.
So the students get more of a rounded feedback. And that's something I immediately felt when I went to the Ambrose Academy that I never felt anywhere else, because I related to that feeling, because that's what I really felt existed within the Wing Chun Do school that I created along with my wife. And also the ability to, when you're talking to someone or interacting with someone on something that's of a common interest, you get a feeling of the depth that they care for and what they're talking about. And you can tell when something comes really from the heart, something that is part of like breathing, it's just part of you. And I felt that in Rocco, because I really felt that he was not just interested in the physiological. He wasn't just in Bruce Lee and Kung Fu and fighting. No, that was very secondary. That was sort of a byproduct of the training. It was being able to feel that here was someone that you could relate to on a personal level, a spiritual level, an emotional level, because you were talking the same language. And so therefore, when I evolved myself to a point in which I knew that I was going to have to fold my hands or retire because of my own physical problems, that it was just a simple choice to be able to realize that Rocco was really just an extension of myself, that he had qualities that I admired, because it was like looking at myself in many ways on what I was trying to accomplish in martial arts, things that gave me satisfaction in the martial arts, things that made me excited about being involved in something that I truly felt was offering people a way to enrich their own life. And so this is why it was a very simple choice for me to hand over Wing Chun Do to it's Professor Ambrose, because to me, professor just simply means that I recognize that he has attained a level of a very high level, not only of skill and understanding, but an ability to teach. And so you bypass and go past the or normal sifu or instructor.
Excellent. You answered my second question in that answer already. So let me just skip to my third one in regards to that. What emotions were you personally feeling when you were handing him your Grandmaster belt?
Well, the emotions are again so positive, because it, like I say, it's an extension of yourself that you're giving, that you realize that something that you always wanted to do was perpetuate something that you'd created, something that you felt had great value. And then to be able to know that you can continue this same tradition of teaching, the same tradition of expanding and understanding better how to enrich people's lives, how to give them something that you know without a doubt is going to make life more exciting to them, better for them, then this awareness made me very pleased in having this opportunity to transfer Wing Chun Do to somebody who I knew was going to be able to maintain the same high level that I felt was necessary in order to accomplish what I wanted to.
Excellent. Is there a common misconception about Wing Chun Do or martial arts in general that nags at you?
There isn't a misconception as much as a lack of an understanding. People, especially nowadays, I don't understand how people perceive the martial arts, because martial arts doesn't exist in the way that I knew it 20, 30 years ago. Their whole perception of martial arts is really more physical because of the MMA. And I don't know how to relate to it. It's frustrating to me, because I feel the value in our culture, by our culture I mean the Western culture versus the Asian culture, is that we don't have a lot of things that we can grab a hold of or grasp that gives us a true feeling of I don't know, value, so to speak. In other words, the respect for the martial arts that used to be there. I feel frustrated because I feel that the martial arts out there is not really the martial arts. It doesn't really give you anything that any substance. It's very fragmented. It's not really anything that's solid and that you can say a system, something that you can teach from A to B to C to D. It's just a potpourri and a whole bunch of things thrown together from every system you can think of. So from that standpoint, I'm very disappointed in the potential future of martial arts as we know it. But I have a sliver of hope that at least we have Wing Chun Do, which I feel is maintaining its stability as far as teaching the core principles that make it something that will really allow a person to feel excited about what they're doing, because they can feel themselves growing as a part of being part of it, rather than learning how to fight or learning a lot of physical things that give them no real satisfaction, especially later on as they get away from training. They realize that it did them no good for later life. And that to me is an important part of martial arts, is to be able to contribute to your total growth as an individual rather than for the moment that you're training. And therein is, to me, the uniqueness of Wing Chun Do, is that it is really, even though you spend a small part of your life doing it, it really affects you your whole life, because it affects your perception of yourself, your confidence, your mental and physical being. There's so many positive factors that allow me to appreciate having been involved in Wing Chun Do compared to what I see out there today.
Okay. And last year I had asked you about your feelings about MMA and whether you see a Wing Chun Do playing any type of role in that, and just Wing Chun Do is a system that's designed to end a fight in 3 seconds or less.
2 seconds or less, yeah.
Beg your pardon. Sorry. I forgot I was talking to Sijo. 2 seconds or less. So that doesn't really sell a whole lot of tickets for the MMA. If you got a Wing Chun Do fighter in there who ends things in less than 2 seconds in the first round, do you think that may be a reason why you don't see Wing Chun Do people entering? Or do you think that through the Wing Chun Do system, you're taught such respect for yourself and for each other that fighting for trophies or glory just doesn't enter the mindset of someone who develops and trains in the Wing Chun Do system? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't think that it's the MMA and Wing Chun Do are really separate in so much as that they both are very physical. However, a person goes into MMA, to me, has a Neanderthal mentality. By that, they don't think in the same way as normal martial arts from the standpoint of an art or something that is, like I say, is more than just fighting. It doesn't emphasize fighting at all, but it is very good for fighting if it should be reduced to that. Whereas the only function of MMA is for fighting. So therefore, it does not care for any concepts or principles that have nothing to do with fighting. Whereas Wing Chun Do is really about subliminally, indirectly dealing with lifelong personal development, dealing with qualities that will allow a person to gain various elements about personal growth that don't exist in MMA. If you don't win in MMA, you are destroyed because you're a failure. And that doesn't happen in Wing Chun Do. So, and then don't just pick on Wing Chun Do. There's a lot of other systems that are also respected because they are to help people grow. But at the same time, my disappointment in MMA is that it tends to create an illusion of that's what the martial arts is about. And so all the young people think in terms of, I want to be in MMA. But they go into an MMA club and they get punched in the face hard once and they drop out. So they become disillusioned about martial arts. Not MMA, they become disillusioned about martial arts. So anytime they hear about martial arts, they think, And this is really sad because to me, the martial arts in our culture has a lot of value as far as really offering a way to grow as an individual that nothing else does. Because a lot of people, especially male, are very physical orientated. And during that immaturity of growing through this awkward period of self-confidence building, they really don't have anything to grab hold of to feel any security physically. So they go into the martial arts, and if the martial arts doesn't really directly contribute, then they leave feeling frustrated and disappointed and depressed. Whereas in Wing Chun Do, the whole idea is to make them excited about their physiology, to be aware that they may possibly get into a physical conflict and that this will help them be successful in defending themselves. But that is a secondary, that's a byproduct. The primary thing is to use it to grow as an individual, And although it's very physical martial arts wise, it's all designed for, to me, it's a non-offensive combative that is very offensive should you need it. But like I say, I see such a separation from MMA and Wing Chun Do and many other arts because of the Neanderthal mentality. That's that, and I understand that because I have a Neanderthal mentality from my youth. But I don't see any value in it. I don't think it's a positive thing.
Gotcha. And you mentioned it. You actually wrote an incredible piece about your life's journey on wingchundo.com called "Evolving from the Dark Side."
Dark side, yeah.
Yeah, and I want to ask you about the dark side in a bit. But first, just for the uninitiated in my audience, can you take us back a bit? I touched briefly on your history of growing up in an orphanage right now. Can take us back. What were the socioeconomic conditions like? What happened with mom and dad? In a nutshell, leading up to you getting into the Air Force and then ultimately going to Edison.
The only thing I want to correct you on, I was born in 35. I was born in 38.
Pardon me.
So, that makes a big deal when you get my age. You don't want to be any older than you have to be, But at the same time, I was brought up in a very difficult circumstances because my father was from the Philippines, and he was basically a gambler, drank a lot. He wasn't a good father. He was about 45, I think, when he met my mother. My mother was 15. She was from a little town called Dalhart, Texas. Before that, the family had lived in Alabama. My grandfather was part of the KKK, Ku Klux Klan. He had his own sheet and everything. So did my grandmother. My grandmother was part of the Ku Klux Klan from the women's division. Yeah, it was. He used to march in the parades. And my mother would say, "Oh, there's Daddy," and my grandmother would say, "Shh," because they weren't supposed to be able to recognize the guys in the sheets, but she recognized his shoes. But anyway, so it was a very dysfunctional youth, and so my mother ran away and went to San Francisco when she was 15 with another girl, and the police were looking for them and found the girl. But they didn't find my mother, and my mother happened to run into a woman who took her in. And it was through this woman that she met my father. And one thing or another, I think she was 16 when she had my brother and then my sister and then me. Well, because of the kind of atmosphere my mother lived in, she was exceptionally fragile emotionally. And here she was, she was, used to being in a small town, and suddenly she's in San Francisco around all these people. She's got 3 kids. She couldn't deal with it emotionally. So back in those days, they didn't have social services. And so the Catholic Church had foster homes that they took children that were out of disrupted families. And so they took us and put us in an orphanage and my sister in a foster home. Because my mother just couldn't deal with it. She was just totally going crazy and was totally incapable of the responsibilities of children. And meanwhile, my father was off doing whatever. And back in those days, the Filipinos, like the Mexicans, are migrant workers now. I mean, you know them, you hear them all the time in California working in the fields. Where back in those days, back in the 20s and 30s, it was Filipinos. And so my father he was a cook and worked in many of the fields, cooking for the different migrant workers. But we were in an orphanage. I was in an orphanage called St. Mary's. No, not St. Mary's. I can't remember the one that was in San Francisco. I was just a baby. But I went from San Francisco to Oregon in an orphanage, to one called St. Mary's, and then I went to one in Washington called Briscoe. And the reason that I transferred from one to the other was that the church wanted me to be close to my mother. But even though my mother couldn't handle us emotionally, she was still there. And I don't even remember seeing her when I was very young. But my mother remarried. My father died in the 40s, mid-40s, of pneumonia or something. And then she married somebody that was from the same village in the Philippines as my father. And he was a dirtbag. He got some girl pregnant that was working on the farm that he had. So my mother divorced him so that she could marry the guy, her husband. It was crazy. So needless to say, everything stayed really dysfunctional. So they wouldn't allow us to go live with them. And so after the divorce, my mother remarried again, and damned if it wasn't the third person from the same village in the Philippines. They all knew one another. So they tried to, for a couple of months, we went and stayed with him, and then he was really a nut. So we had to go back into the orphanage. So anyway, I was in the orphanage till I was about 12 and a half. And then when I got out, I went to live with my mother and my stepfather, who was crazy. So I was never home. I was always out in the street, and that's why I was in trouble all the time, because I had no supervision. And I was so used to the Catholic way of dealing with problem children, which was beating you with straps, and especially at Briscoe. All of them had these big leather straps, and you did anything wrong and you got the strap, So I was used to being controlled by knowing that if I did something wrong, I was going to get the strap. So I became not good, I just became sneakier. So I didn't get caught as much. But unfortunately, when I left the school, Briscoe, I went into a Catholic school. It was called Immaculate Conception, which was run by nuns. And nuns, they didn't have straps. They didn't punish you. So obviously, I went really crazy as far as being a bad kid and got expelled. And so that just one thing led to another, and then I got busted for doing some things that I shouldn't have done, but which was a good thing that happened, because it really shocked me to realizing that everything I was doing, although I didn't really feel it was wrong, it was really illegal, a lot of the things I was doing. And the thing that finally made me aware that I shouldn't be doing it anymore is because I was suddenly in jail behind these bars facing 5 to 15 years. And I thought, something's wrong with this program. So I was very lucky, because no one I had never done anything that I'd been caught for. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I didn't do anything. I was a A student in school, even though I never went to school when I got out, as far as, attending class. When I took the test, I aced because I'll say one thing about being in an orphanage, you learned well. And so academically, I was much further ahead than people of my own age in the 8th grade. So, and what it gets down to is I had a really good background record as a kid, so they blamed everything on me getting into trouble on the guy that I was with when I got busted, because he was a real punk. He was smart ass. He smart-mouthed the judge, whereas I knew, hey, we've been caught. So I was sorry.
Play it cool, man.
So they gave him time, sent him to prison, and they let me out. But I had what they called a 3-year deferred sentence, which meant that if you were good for 3 years and did nothing, they wiped it from your record as if it didn't exist. But I had to go back to school. Well, guess what? That's where I met Bruce Lee. I had to go back. So I went to Edison Tech. Edison Tech is where Bruce was going, because he'd been expelled from school in Hong Kong. And we both were doing makeup credits to go to the university. So one thing led. So I was really fortunate that I got busted.
Yeah.
Because if I hadn't got busted, I wouldn't have went to Edison.
Right.
And who knows what would have happened to me. So, but anyway, then I just evolved up, and Well, I went in the service at 15. I was getting in trouble. I wasn't going to school. And by that, I mean I wouldn't attend class. And they tried to get me back. I wouldn't do it. So finally, they arrested me and said they were going to send me to a place called Chehalis. Now, Chehalis was a prison for kids under 17 or 18. If you were in trouble, they sent you there. So the judge said, you're going to go to Chehalis or you can go in the military. Well, I thought, what do you mean go in the military? Well, he said, your mother can sign you that you're 17. So I went home and told my mother that, they were going to send me to jail or I had to go into service. And so she went and she signed that I was 17, that I had no birth certificate. So that was in March of 1954, 4 months before my 16th birthday. But that was good because it really taught me discipline. I was a wild kid, but the Air Force, even though it wasn't like the Army or Marines discipline, it still required a lot of structure. And I needed that. I needed to be answerable for things I did wrong. And in the Air Force, obviously, you got court-martials. So it really turned me around. I was getting older, and it was a good experience. So it really contributed to me all of a sudden becoming aware that I needed to get a little more stability in my life,
Yeah.
Funny, a lot of things happen to me in the Air Force, but people wonder why I don't drink. I never have drunk. Well, the reason is that when I turned 16, I was stationed in Waco, Texas. And the guys around me knew that I was only 16 and never drank. So they were going to show me how to drink. So we went down to a local bar and I drank. They were giving me these bottles, these glasses of whiskey. And I drank a lot. All I remember was throwing up all over this guy's beautiful car, going back to the barracks, and for about 24 hours holding onto the bed because my bed was flying all over the barracks. I was so sick. I've never drank since. The one experience, I've never drank since because I always remembered that. And for some reason, I just thought, if this is what drinking's about, I don't want any part of it. So anyway.
That's good. That's good. You mentioned that going into the Air Force was good because it helped provide structure. And something that you talked about last year was that you believe that everybody has the opportunity to take control of their own life, and through structure, you can solve basically any problem. Many people feel powerless or stuck, many of them due to forces or circumstances beyond their circle of influence, or so they believe. How does one take control when they feel so out of control?
Well, it's not that simple. If you're out of control, you're usually lost. You're really kind of pivoting through life and just getting bounced around by these negative experiences. You have to in some way be able to sort of stop the world and get off. Literally stop it and just step back and get away from everything so that you can really clear your thinking and get it onto some single train of thought about where do I begin? What do I do first? Because there's just too much. You're being overwhelmed. And this is where it's difficult because usually then you need to interact with someone who can feed back to you your own thoughts. You can't really do it by yourself. It's very difficult. And this is where I feel that I have a lot of value because I'm very neutral. I care, but I don't care. In other words, I'll help you, but if you don't take it and help yourself, then I have no more interest in you. I'm only giving you information.
Yes.
That's my responsibility. But at the same time, a lot of people need that because they need for someone who is outside of their problem to be able to allow them to see their problem in a different way. Not to give them answers. I don't believe I'm not a therapist. I don't have the answers. I just have techniques, like in martial arts. They're good techniques, but you must make them work. Because again, it's just information unless you do something with it. So my thing is being able to show you different ways to look at the problem that you have, and then a methodology to make the change. And that's where the internalization type of techniques that I teach are to change the subconscious presets and default settings that have been there since childhood that are really out of your control because they're there imprinted and you don't know what to do with them. And now that you're an adult, you can step back, look at them and see what you need to change. You just need a way to change them. And so that's what my specialty is showing you how to change those old defaults and presets to new defaults and presets that are more positive and contribute more directly to your growth. And that's kind of what I do now. That's my specialty, so to speak, on the psychological side of Wing Chun Do.
Makes sense. You're a huge believer in the power of our subconscious mind, and that everyone can become in their way their own master therapist. Mm-hmm. When did you first discover the power of your own subconscious, and how do you continue to train your subconscious throughout your daily life in Hawaii?
Well, there has to be something that affects you emotionally, because you can go to motivational speakers and get all rah, and then the next day forget it because you're distracted. So I'm a great believer that the only way to learn in a way that's going to be effective, you have to be taught or react to the information emotionally. So when I look at my own evolution as an individual, I think of why did I change? What caused me to change? And it's always emotional. When I got divorced, that was an emotion that caused me to totally reevaluate myself relative to my relationships. When I got busted, I had to relook at myself as far as, where am I going? What is the pleasure I get out of things? What is the importance of what I'm doing? In other words, I emotionally stepped back and looked at these rather than just psychologically, just sitting and thinking about them. No, they affected me. Circumstances that I thought about in the service that caused me a tremendous amount of conflict. Being stationed in the Deep South back in the 50s when tremendous prejudice. And although I'm not, African American or black, people thought I was because I was so dark complected. And so they treated me as such. They'd spit at my feet. They'd get all upset if I wanted to sit in the back of the bus. The cab drivers wouldn't pick you up. If you were going to get on an elevator in a building, you had to get off if there were white people in there. All these little things that if you were on the sidewalk and people were coming down, you had to step off the sidewalk to let them pass if they were taking up the whole sidewalk. This confused me. But it really affected me emotionally because you had to remember I was probably at that time around 17. So I was very immature emotionally in many ways. So it was things like that were part of my whole emotional makeup, that were part of the framework that I was thinking when I was 19, 20 years old, of what was life about, especially when I got busted. It was really a shock because I was facing going to prison. So this is where, and also I was taking a psychology class at Edison, actually along with Jesse, my senior, and Bruce. And we used to talk about different things that we were listening in the psychology class that were interesting and we never thought about. And so again, my main thing was I recognized all these emotional conflicts, but intellectually I was saying, yeah, but I'm really okay. I'm as good as anybody else. But there seemed to be this big argument between my emotions and my intellect. So I thought there's something wrong here. I need to be able to have some way to communicate with myself. And this is where I began to break things down into, well, what is communication? How come I can't talk to myself? Well, it's because I didn't know how to. So there is where I began to recognize the difference between the conscious and the subconscious, that there was a subconscious, that part of me which seemed to be out of my control. That was part of the motherboard in a computer. It's all in there, but you can't see it. But it's critical, to be there because nothing would work without it. So I began to think more about, well, what is the conscious? What is the subconscious? How can you prove that there's a subconscious? Is there really something in there that has the ability to actually control me, even though I think that I, through my thoughts, should be the one in control? Why all this conflict? And so that started my studying into the separation between the conscious and subconscious. Plus, at that period of time in 1960, my psychology instructor, his name was Boyd Agner. Why I remember that, I don't know. You forget so many things and all of a sudden. But Boyd was a gunner on a bombardier in the Second World War and was shot down and had been caught up in a fire and was badly burned all through his body, especially his face. And So in the VA, they of course tried to do something, but back in those days, everything was very primitive, and they tried to give you a lot of drugs and just told you to grin and bear it. But he knew somebody who had done some hypnosis, one of the doctors, and so he got involved in hypnosis, and it helped him somewhat. But anyway, he brought this up as he thought hypnosis had really a lot of potential versus just going to drugs all the time. Well, I became fascinated with it because I was trying to think, how do you use the mind as an effective tool to work out your own problems? And I'd never seen anything that gave me a belief that it would work. But the way he talked about hypnosis and its function, the more it made me think that, gee, maybe this could be it. So I got the name of an outfit in L.A. at that time, a book kind of person who did books on hypnosis, different levels of hypnosis. Melvin Powers, in fact, was the name. So I sent for some of his books and read them and studied them and practiced the techniques and began to explore doing inductions with students. And I happen to have an ability to, do inductions and actually produce results in focus, concentration, memory, things like that. And anyway, it became something that I began to explore more in depth because I could begin to see by results of working with other people, accomplishing things that before people said you couldn't really do. And then I began to apply them to myself relative to my own personal emotional problems. But I had to have some way of identifying how to structure what was wrong into some clear, distinct pattern of information, about my own emotions. Why was I depressed, and what were the different things that I could identify I needed to work on because they were causing me a lot of stress. And this is where I developed the pyramid and the game plan and the particular techniques that I use today to better understand myself so that I could eliminate these problems, thereby being able then to truly be beneficial to other people, because I could, by knowing that it worked because of my own evolution, I now could with confidence deal with other people, knowing that if they were interested in a technique that would help them, they could do the same thing because it wasn't a complicated technique. It was just an A, B, C, D type of thing, just like in Wing Chun Do. A goes to B, B goes to C. And it's all very simple and efficient and practical. So there's where my life changed, because when I was only like in my early 20s when this was happening. And really, very quickly, my own life began to change because I began to really see a lot of the things that I was afraid of emotionally actually dissolve. So I began to feel myself evolving as far as being able to gain truly self-confidence and believe in myself. So it was through this evolution of my own work on myself that I formulated the basic psychological elements of Wing Chun Do, so that if students were interested, I could work with them and show them how to, help themselves. And so that's basically what were, my own development started, and the reason it evolved is because of my own experiences.
Okay, and what do you have any practices that you do in Hawaii on a daily basis or weekly basis that...
I don't do practices. I work with people with cancer or dementia. The one case that I just finished with was a stuttering case, 37 years old. I worked with him for 3 sessions, actually 4, but 3. And he had been stuttering since he was probably 8 or 9. And moderate to severe, depending on the situation he was in. And within three sessions, it was completely gone.
Excellent.
Well, because it's really, once you understand how the mind works, a lot of this is same for post-traumatic stress disorder. It's amazing how quickly the mind will change if, in fact, you show them a simple way to do it without it having to say, give up anything. And by give up something, I mean memory. If you have traumatic memory, you don't have to give up the traumatic memory. What you want to get rid of is the emotional association. Because the memory is who you are. It happened to you. I don't care how bad it is. It happened to you. And the subconscious will fight you trying to get rid of that memory. But it will not really fight you that hard to get rid of the emotion because there's really no reason for it because it's in the past.
Right.
If it was current or present, yeah, but no, it's in the past.
Right.
So that's the thing about stuttering. It's, it usually starts around 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it's just imprinted. It becomes a default setting. Mm. Subconscious doesn't care. Mm-hmm. It'll just continue the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. But if you want to change it, it'll say, oh, okay. You just got to give it a good reason to it and a methodology to change that imprinting. And therein is the internalization techniques.
Right. I told you I wanted to ask you about the dark side. The dark side is an important concept in Wing Chun Do, and you've said that your dark side is one of the 3 tools that you would never give up. Talk about your dark side and what it means to you, and also how important it is for an individual to get to know and control their own.
Well, the dark side, you can look at it from a psychological standpoint and from a physical standpoint. A psychological standpoint is the dark side is usually dealing with a lot of emotions that screw up your life, cause you a lot of stress, depression, anxiety. Well, these are things that are unique to the individual and have to be handled differently. Whereas when we talk about the dark side in martial arts, we talk about it acting as fuel to use the techniques you use in such a way that they become exceptionally destructive, very powerful. Because without the dark side, all it is just physical movement. Well, it's a big difference because the dark side has emotions in it, whereas physical technique usually doesn't. It's just kinetic. It's just a repetitive action. Whereas when the dark side is involved, it takes something that is simple and makes it exceptionally dynamic and explosive because it is there's an energy that you can't tap into any other way other than through the dark energy, the negative emotions, the dark emotions. So when we talk about being able to deal with the dark side, we have to look at it as what do I want to get rid of and what do I want to keep? Well, what I want to keep is the energy that comes from the dark side. And what we're talking about there is what is the energy? Well, it's the explosive adrenals sending out the hormone that puts the body into shock to react to a particular threat. So therefore, what we're dealing is we can talk about a psychological problem as being something that is caused by environmental or personal problems, because of family or who knows what. That's quite different than the actual chemical reaction that happens in the dark side. Well, with training, you can actually trigger the dark side without it having to be associated directly with an emotion that you've experienced. I don't know if that's confusing to you.
No.
But the whole idea is from a martial arts standpoint, is to train the person so they can tap into the electrochemical response that we identify as associated with dark side experiences. So when I talk about anger and fear and resentment and guilt, frustration, and I talk all these negative things, I'm talking about words that describe the electrochemical reaction. Well, let's set all these dark side emotions aside and just train the chemical reaction. And that then is the pure emotion that you use in training. And that's why in Wing Chun Do, we don't emphasize all the negative psychological emotional things. We just talk about the purity of the dark side itself, the electrochemical.
Yeah, and that you're training the brain to encourage that physical response to then fuel your actual physical response or the chemical reaction.
Again, I like the computer because we use words like presets and defaults, but a default in this particular case is that for any reason that you want, you need to have something that you can access immediately, instantly, if it needs to be.
Okay.
So in order to do that, you have to be able to reach in and create a trigger for the accessing that electrochemical, which of course is an actual hormonal physical reaction. Well, that's the thing that is a problem with most training. How do you access something you can't see, you can't touch, that is part of your autonomic makeup? Well, you trained your startle response, because everybody has to have something that they recognize they can create almost some sort of a tangible understanding, and people have experienced being startled. So it's something they can recognize. Okay, well then subconsciously, your subconscious knows what you're talking about, and therefore it has a direct association of what you're going to train. So now we have something that actually can be identified, that we can now build commands around to get the subconscious to be sensitive to this trigger or key that you use to respond. And that is the whole thing about dark side to me that has value, is that I can control it. It's not something that I develop and then all of a sudden it's like a bomb that can go off at any time. No. I have control of it, and it may never come out if I don't want to use it.
Right.
But it's there, and that's an important part of your self-confidence and your ability to know that what you've trained in Wing Chun Do when you were young is still as effective when you're 80 years old. Right. It's just lying there dormant, and that trigger of the dark side is also laying there dormant and will come out instantly to make you suddenly Superman for a split second.
Right. I like it. During your last visit, and how are we doing on time, by the way? Okay. During your last visit, you lamented that you wish more women would be open to training in Wing Chun Do. And what do you believe causes women to forego potentially training in a martial art, especially in a culture of seemingly rampant sexual harassment that's going on right now? And why should a woman be interested in learning self-defense and Wing Chun Do specifically?
Well, unfortunately, women in our culture, I believe, are taught not to defend themselves. They're taught that they should recognize that it is the men who are responsible for taking care of them. Now, that's been something that has been accepted for many generations. However, that's changed within the last 30, 20 years, where women are becoming much more aware of their equality relative to being able to take care of themselves, psychologically and physically. It's just that everything is geared towards the male. Training, technique, all physical concepts are male-orientated. When you look at all the women's self-defense, it is not geared for women's self-defense. It's geared for women's self-defense doing men things. Mm-hmm. Because it's the men who use their perception of what women should be doing to defend themselves. Yet women respond differently. Their whole physiological response is different. Their interpretations are different. Their triggers of alarm are different. There's so many factors that are different. So I'm very a strong believer that women's self-defense, a good women's self-defense program should, one, be developed along with a man relative to concepts and principles that a man understands from a physical standpoint, but women haven't been exposed to and therefore don't really understand it, but need the closeness and the patience of a man to work with them till they do understand it. Then for a woman to be able to design techniques from a woman's standpoint relative to now what they understand a man can do, but from a woman's standpoint. And also women should be the primary instructor. A man should be there for students to interact with, women to interact. They need to interact with a man because of a man's energy. And a man creates this fear in a woman without realizing it, simply because of their energy, the power of presentation to a woman. Women don't know how to deal with it. It's very physical. So I don't care how hard a woman is trained. And this is what really surprised me, and I won't mention her name, but someone I really respect as far as a woman martial artist, world-class champion. I was training her one time in Seattle many years ago, and we were chatting, and I said that we got to talking about women in self-defense. And I said, how do you feel about women's self-defense? And she said, women's self-defense really doesn't exist in so much as that women learn a lot of physical things, but they don't learn emotional self-defense. And I said, what do you mean by that? And she says, I'm very good physically, and I can fight other women physically. And she did. She was a champion. She said, but I find if I go against a man and the man is aggressive, it freaks me out. She said, I can't help it. She says, no matter what I know I can do, I can't do it because of that energy that a man gives off that she doesn't know how to deal with. She's never trained for it. And that really meant a lot to me because I really could step back and try and see from her perception how that would work. It's like, say, a guy who's intimidated by somebody who's much, much bigger than them. And even though they train and they face off with this person, I don't care how confident they are, they look at this person and know that person could crush them or hurt them, you know? Well, imagine if you're a woman, it's much worse. So I think that what I would like to see is I would like to see sort of a starting point to say, okay, let's step back and let's not talk about women's self-defense. Let's talk about it from a different standpoint. Let's talk about that we got a problem here we need to solve. How can we solve it? Now let's sit down and start from zero and talk about that rather than to say, well, I have the answers. I don't have any answers. But I have a lot of information that could be useful. But you have to turn it into something that's going to be useful by you being able to see the value of it relative to what you're afraid of. Because if I'm going to teach a woman self-defense, one is I'm going to make it super minimal. And the other is I'm going to make it something that a woman could actually believe she could do against a man who is physically, aggressively trying to hurt her.
Right.
But I also believe that woman's self-defense should not be, her particular personal tool pouch should be relatively small. I would say probably no more than a dozen things in a good self-defense program. They don't need any more. Because a woman's self-defense, her situation is so much different than a man's. A man will put himself in a very vulnerable position to a woman, whereas he wouldn't with another man, especially in a potentially violent situation. It wouldn't. So therefore, a woman doesn't have to waste time learning a lot of things a man would because they won't experience that. Distance is one of them. A man stupidly will always present himself close enough to get wiped out in that 2-second interval. So therefore, there are certain things a woman should understand relative to self-defense that are based on reality rather than martial arts. For instance, somebody will say, well, if I grab you like this, and then you realize you've grabbed me in such a way that I can't really do a lot, but I can do a lot of martial artsy stuff. I can try and kick you in the groin or stomp on your foot, or I can give you an elbow, or I can do a thumb to the temple or something. Think I'm doing something. And in reality, it'd be totally useless in the street, but it's martial arty. It looks good. And you can do it in a club. So I tell a woman, well, if you're in such a position you can't do anything, don't do anything. Submit. Because once you submit, he's going to turn you around. He's going to open himself up now that you can do something. But if he's got you in a position you can't do anything, he can't do anything either. So why should you learn a technique you'd never be able to use to try and get out of that stupid position in the first place? Right. So that's, again, my logic in women's self-defense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Oh, wow. So you said there's two sides of Wing Chun Do, the physical and the mental. And since you've passed the system to Qigong, you've been focused on the personal growth and development side of training students versus most of the physical aspects. What are some of the concepts or ideas you're working on instituting and collaborating on with Qigong and how do you foresee them helping others?
Well,
helping grow others?
That's one of the main reasons I'm here, is to be able to sit down and work with Rocco for developing the best techniques we can to allow the kind of students that exist today. Now, it's easy to talk about things that happened 10, 20 years. No. What kind of student is there today? What kind of problems exist? What do people need? So we can update our thinking relative to seeing whether our techniques to be, upgraded, changed, or whatever. Teaching methods, all that. We need to discuss that, really work on that, and make sure everything is best that we can do at this time. But also to be able to think of different ways to access the student from a different standpoint other than just to come down and let's train in the club. We're talking about being able to have regular things during the month, Skype type of meetings of people that could, through the internet, we can discuss things that are important to them relative to martial arts or personal development relative to martial arts. Being able to have, a group. And by group, I simply mean people who have a common interest. I find it very problematic to say, we're going to have this thing and anybody can get in. Because as soon as you do that, you get every crazy in the world out there who wants to get in and has an opinion about what should be right and wrong, and they haven't an idea of what they're talking about. And they don't have any real interest as much as to be involved with a group. Right. So we're not interested in that. We're interested in really producing results as early as possible with people who have an interest, who have a need. So we're working on different ideas relative to how to better use the internet. What techniques are available, what methods are available that will allow us to accomplish things with people outside of our reach, people out in other countries or who can't come to Detroit or Livonia. I always say Detroit, but it's Livonia, or come to Hilo, Hawaii. I know they'd love to come to Hilo, Hawaii.
Yes, we all would probably love to come to Hilo.
But so we're working on different ideas. We're exploring different ideas so that as soon as possible, we really can be able to reach those people who are very interested. And the university teaching concept that have developed now for being able to have a structured way to teach people who want to be able to get involved in Wing Chun Do, who want to be able to for themselves learn, but at the same time maybe teach at some point to share. And then also how to bring into the whole program the psychological, because we're not looking for therapists. I tell people, look, all you are is a guide with information. I'm going to teach you the information. I'm going to teach you how to share the information. But please don't ever think you're a therapist, because to me, therapy is thinking that you have the answers to a person's problems. And the thing I learned long ago, you don't have the answers. But I have the answers to my own problems. You have the answers to your problems. So our approach is to show you how to access those problems, how to identify them, how to communicate with yourself, and then how to change them. But it all requires you to be interested yourself in yourself, because you're responsible for yourself. We're not responsible for you. We're responsible for teaching you techniques that are simple, efficient, and practical, but at the same time, they are nothing other than information unless you make them work. So that's why we're working diligently now to try and formulate techniques that will allow us to share this information with people who are interested, not only, again, for themselves, but look to saying, gee, I really want to help people. I want to get out and I can see how screwed up these young people are today. I want to be able to have a way to give them a chance to really get something out of life, to enrich their life, to feel that there's something that has value. And that's kind of what I see the present day Wing Chun Do being about. And then again is why my enthusiasm and excitement about the Ambrose Academy being the central source of where this is all going to happen. And I'm going to be as diligent as I can while I can, still being involved in helping, being part of the teaching process, not as much as I used to, but for the people, the groups that are interested, I want to be able to contribute what I can from what I know, along with the overall perspective of what Wing Chun Do has to offer. So,
excellent. Just a couple more questions before I ask you the questions I ask everyone. The world has changed much in your lifetime. What do you see happening today that causes you concern? And on the other hand, what do you see happening which gives you a lot of hope for the future?
Well, I'm again, my generations go way back, and so therefore I look back at the simplistic times and realize there were no drugs, there was family, there was you had your religion, you had your government, your politics. There was a value in all of that. You had respect for the police department, and then over a period of time, all these things began to fall apart. All these things began to be self-serving. And so therefore people lost confidence in being able to identify them as something that they could relate to. Well, I don't know really what the answer is on how to solve that, but all I see it is getting worse. So my feeling is that there's nothing that I can do, especially at my age now, other than to try to share with people who want to share with others, so that there can be a way to reach out to the people who need to grasp onto something that they feel has value, things that they can relate to. By that I simply mean being able to have some way of feeling better about themselves, of being able to not look at themselves only through the eyes of other people, or everything's screwed up because the government's screwed up, or the religions are screwed up, or the family's screwed up. No. If you can look at yourself separate from that as a unique individual that has this ability, this potential to really get something out of life and to really accomplish something by having this moment to exist, then that means that you can become more independent and not dependent on who you are because of everything around you. Well, this is not going to happen unless something happens now to cause this to happen tomorrow. By that I mean that, like, we'll just say Wing Chun Do. If Wing Chun Do stays like it is and stays as a stabilizing factor to the people who come in, then that means that this is something that will be a place that people can come to, kind of like a family, that you feel good about being around, everybody being the same, so to speak, and wanting to get more out of life, wanting to feel better about themselves, more excited about themselves. But this is not going to happen unless we make it happen, because it's too late now for all the things that are falling apart. I don't know, there's no answer for it. However, if we say, well, wait a minute, we have this little island that's floating here in which there is stability. And the stability comes from, the answers are not in this little island, the answers are in you, and it's on this island that are the techniques, the wherewithal, the energy, the common thread to get more out of the future, if you're young especially. So that's again why we're working so hard on what we're trying to figure out on accomplishing technique, is how, if somebody comes to you, do you, without interfering with their life, taking away from them free will, how do you get them to suddenly say, God, it's great to be alive. Gee, this is, it's something they're depressed.
Right.
Well, here I'm in my 80s, and I'm excited about it. I'm like a child. Every day is exciting to me. There's a new adventure. Why? Because I believe in myself. I'm excited about being alive. I appreciate about being alive. I know the world's screwed up, but wait a minute. That's the world. I don't need to be screwed up just because the world's screwed up.
Sure.
So therefore, what I'm doing is I'm taking responsibility for my own life, my own emotions, my own feelings, my own interpretations, and enjoying every minute of it. Well, if I can share that with other people who want that emotional stability, then I have value. I have a purpose. And that's, again, what, to me, Wing Chun Do is about.
Excellent. What would you say is the most important thing that, I'm going to call you a martial scientist. What is the most important thing that being a martial scientist has taught you?
Well, first of all, I've never considered myself a martial artist. It's funny people hear me say that. I've been in martial arts for 60 years. But I don't consider myself a martial artist because I don't think of in terms of martial arts. I just think it as a methodology to grow, to develop. It just happens to have fighting kind of concept, but I'm not interested in that. But at the same time, I really feel that when I look at everything that I do, everything that I have, it's always gets down to, why have I gotten as much as I have out of the martial arts? Because of my thinking, the way that I think, the value I put on myself, the things that I can see. Because I've been exposed to the Bruce Lees, I've been exposed to a lot of information, how this is affected me in a positive way, in such a way that I'm thinking, gee, maybe other people could use this. So therefore, I've taken the time to organize and structure it into a way to communicate it, giving it form and structure. And there's where, to me, the science comes in, because I think in terms of it has to be able to be proven. It hadn't just worked for me. If it just worked for me, fine. But I feel very strongly that everything techniques that I've developed not only can work for me, can work for anybody, because there's nothing magical about them. They're just information. And it's neutral information in so much as that it can be applied to anyone. So that is why when I think in terms of martial arts relative, and again, the science and the relationship between the two, I see the structure of martial arts and the physical elements within martial arts as being the sort of the groundwork for taking science and seeing how that can be formulated into something that has the kind of meaning that other people can understand, that other people can say, gee, I could do that, because when you look at what I do, it's very simple and it's consistent. If you read the book that I wrote back in 1975, and you look at all the things I wrote in there about personal development, there isn't one thing in there that's different. And here it is, how many? Almost 40-some years later.
42 years later. Yeah.
Not different. So I have proven to myself, not only because it has helped me evolve and get rid of all the garbage I accumulated as a child, emotional, negative, the dark side, it has allowed me to really see that it works, because I've used it on many, many people as far as applying the techniques or sharing the information. So I've validated it enough for me to say, without any hesitation, gee, I should teach this to somebody else so somebody else can do the same thing that I do, because it's really simple. You don't need to be a doctor. You don't need to go to school for 4 years or 5 years or 10 years. Hell no, it's simple. And remember, you're not being a therapist. You're just learning some simple, cool techniques that allow you to step back and say, damn it, I've really been able to get something out of my life. I've been able to accomplish something that makes me feel really proud of myself, because not only am I getting more out of life, I've given myself an opportunity to grow, but I'm giving that same information to other people. So therefore I get that selfish satisfaction of accomplishing something.
Awesome. All right. How often do you talk to yourself? And do you do so out loud and in the mirror?
I do talk to myself, and very often I'll talk to myself outside, because I have a thing of where I'm talking as if I'm talking to someone else, because it gives me sort of feedback. And it's more difficult to be distracted if I'm talking to myself out loud, where if I'm thinking, it's easy to be distracted by another thought.
Sure.
So I lose my train of thought, because very often I'll have one thought which will parallel with another thought, and I get distracted. Where if I'm talking out loud, I don't.
That makes sense. What do you tell yourself when you screw up, and do you punish yourself?
I never punish myself, because I'm always screwing up. So I constantly punish myself. But it's you never grow from good. You never grow from positive. You never grow from happiness. You only grow from negative, because it's the one that causes a reaction. Right. If it's positive, you just blip along, enjoy it every day. But as soon as something bad happens, now, that means that if you make a mistake, that means that you did something wrong and something that was important to you that you wanted to do right. Well, then, what did I do wrong so I can correct it to do it right? The interesting thing about Thomas Edison, when he was doing the light bulb, the guy says, well, aren't you frustrated? You've tried 1,200 experiments, it didn't work. And he said, no. He said, I did it 1,200 times on how not to make it work.
That's right.
Well, that's true about anything.
You have to fail forward.
Well, that's the whole thing about personal development. That you're realizing that that's the whole kind of the fun of the adventure, is being able to get over the obstacles, to avoid as much as possible obstacles, and to be able to get the satisfaction and excitement of seeing yourself grow. How in the hell can you see yourself grow if you don't stumble?
That's right. What do you tell yourself when you do well, and do you reward yourself?
I don't reward myself other than enjoy the pleasure of evolving, and just the happiness and the contentment and the pleasure of being able to live a more full life because of the pleasure of having accomplished something. So the reward is in the feeling itself, rather than going out and eating a donut or something, which I would do anyway.
How do you relax?
I'm always relaxed.
Okay. It's
am.
funny you say that, because relaxation is a huge part of Wing Chun Do. Yeah.
By relaxed, I mean I have a sense of contentment about being alive and about being able to pak sao or bang sao or tan sao, anything that gets and acts as a threat. But I just do it automatically. I've got all these presets that pop out, and I don't have to do anything about it because I've imprinted them, so they come out automatically. So I'm actually a very calm, laid back, blip along per day person. I have a very violent side if you should trigger me, but I know that, and I want it there because that is my safety factor if anybody should try and interfere with my life. But I'm lucky in so much as that normally people don't mess with me. I mean, they leave me alone. But at the same time, it's important to me that I enjoy each day with a minimum amount of negative or dark side emotions.
Okay.
And that's why I'm so adamant about, especially when you're young, of establishing triggers and default settings that allow you to quickly, immediately eliminate problems as they arise, rather than to allow them to fester and become part of you simply because you don't know how to get rid of them. And so as you get older, you get more depressed and frustrated because you are carrying all this garbage that you're accumulating through life. Whereas the earlier you can get away from it and eliminate it, the more that you're going to grow feeling much excited about being alive.
I agree. I think I already know the answer to this question, but who is the most influential person in your life?
Influential, it has to, it's hard to say because it's almost like episodes have been influential. People say Bruce Lee was influential. He's influential in so much as that here I am, how many years later, still talking about this kid. But little things can be transitory. In other words, I can somebody will say something and all of a sudden you don't realize how it affected you when you started going over here. So I can't really identify any particular thing other than I can pick up things in which there were pivotal points in my life. Divorce, going to jail, meeting Bruce Lee, orphanage. Things that were, a lot of people, it's just like when I tell my wife some of my experiences in Briscoe getting beat, she was horrified. I mean, how could they do that? And I do what? I got caught,
Yeah.
So I got beat, So it wasn't traumatic to me. It was sort of that, you get suffering if you do
Ipso
something
facto,
wrong.
yeah.
So when I look at things that influenced me or affected me, they were traumatic explosions in my life. And by explosions, I mean they were very sudden and very apparent at that moment, even though they might have been spread out. But it was just that episode by itself. Meeting Bruce Lee, it was an episode. I can go through all these things that happened, but it was the episode of my life changing by meeting this kid without realizing it was going to affect me. Divorce, how did that affect me? Why did it affect me? How did it affect my thinking? Well, yet it took over a period of time. Going to jail. Look how long it was before I went to jail.
Well, then what's the one lesson that each of your episodic experiences that, every time you reached one of those pivotal transitory periods or moments in your life, what do you think is the one thread of a lesson that you gleaned from those moments? Is
the awareness of the pivotal potential. In other words, once you realize that negatives are complementary to you growing, you become more aware of being more sensitive when they do happen to change right away. And a lot of times people won't do that. So anything that happens in my life, I instantly react to it. I don't allow it to fester. I don't allow it to be part of me. I get rid of it right away because I see it like being stabbed. Oop!
Right.
If I feel anger or I feel fear or anxiety or depression, these are all signals. what caused it? I want to know today. I don't want to know, 6 years from now.
Right.
Because it's going to screw me up in many ways in relationships and everything else.
Right. What makes you laugh?
Makes me laugh?
Mm-hmm.
Life makes me laugh. It's so amusing, everything. It's just sort of, it's out of my control. So I really, really enjoy life. I enjoy the most simple things in life. I find that it amuses me that people are so caught up in things that have no value, that are so stupid, but yet they let their whole life be controlled of it. And I find that, it's kind of sad to feel that I'm amused about that. But I'm amused in so much as that I myself have long grown past that. So it's an amusing satisfaction.
Sure. You go, those kids, they'll figure it out.
And if they don't, it's their problem.
Right. What makes you cry?
I never cry. Well, the reason is because that's a dark emotion that I feel that I don't have. Because I don't, I correct it before I get to the point of crying.
Fascinating. Right on. What would you say is the defining moment in your career as a martial artist? Or as what people would call you a martial artist?
Well, you make it sound like I'm dead or I'm dying or it's over.
I ask everyone these questions.
No. You see, I'm in the process of making memories.
Okay.
So therefore, I don't look back because I'm involved right now in an adventure and a memory.
Okay.
So I'm always moving ahead. And the day that I'm stopped, then you can ask me that question.
Fair. What is the biggest advice that you've received throughout your time developing the Wing Chun Do system and up to now? And how did you utilize that advice to elevate yourself to whatever the next level you felt was for yourself in your life?
The only advice I've ever gotten is from myself. I don't remember anybody really giving me advice that really had any effect, because it's always that at that time when I got it, I wasn't listening.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I know, but let me. But when I say my own advice, it's when you become aware emotionally of something that before was just psychological information, but all of a sudden the advice is don't do that. It's like when I got stupid drunk when I was 16. Mm-hmm. The advice was don't drink.
Right.
See what I mean? If I got divorced, the advice was, why did I get divorced? You better do something. You better figure out why you got divorced. Right. You got arrested. Why did you get arrested? See, this is self-advice. In other words, you stop and you learn and you tell yourself, hey, don't repeat that. So I grew from it. I've been married 46 years. Was married for 10. Got a divorce. Now I've been married for 46 years. Why am I married 46 years? Because what I learned from the 10.
Right. Absolutely. Define success.
I think success is being able to identify that you on a personal level are moving towards the goals that you've established, that you're overcoming the obstacles, that you feel a sense of satisfaction of this evolution because of the emotions that you feel, the continuity of it, the balance, the harmony you feel. Success is a very personal thing. To me, it's an emotional thing. I can't relate to success on a physical level like money or who knows what, possessions, things like that. To me, it's all emotional. And the more that I can just say that truly to myself in the darkness of my own room, not talking to anybody, being honest with myself, am I happy? Am I evolving every day to being able to have grown from yesterday? Another brick of happiness. So, success to me is again just an emotional feeling that I have that I feel very comfortable with.
Very good. What's next for Wing Chun Do?
Well, like I say, we're in the process of it. That's why I'm here, of being able to work as part of a team, to be able to say, what should we do? I'm too old now to have new creative ideas as much as, say, I can stimulate new creative ideas by my perception. I can be part of the process, but I don't understand what the next step should be because I don't understand what the hell's going on right now.
Sure.
It's too beyond me, and I don't want to understand it because it's a negative. It's too confusing, and why should I think about confusing things of that nature when there's too many good things to think about that I can enjoy life for? But I also have a responsibility because of my experience, because of my having spent time to create Wing Chun Do and wanted to see it perpetuated. I need to, while I still can, contribute what I can to make it better, but along with someone who has similar feelings, similar interests, similar potential intellectually and emotionally. And that's why Rocco and I get along so well together, because we talk the same language. So this is where I'm hoping that we can take Wing Chun Do to its next step. But I also realize that we need new people to come in who feel like we do.
Right.
Because there's got to be more people that feel like we do out there. It's just that they need to be able to have the opportunity, if they want to be able to become part of the family. But at the same time, it is a commitment because they have to really be sincere on really wanting to get more out of life and also to truly help people, to help the students who come, to be sincere and to really learn what is necessary to, again, be the guide to help them achieve the goals that they're setting. So that's kind of what I'm hoping will happen now, and especially on the personal development level, because a lot of people are afraid of the personal development level. They think it's too complex, too involved, and it's really simple. Everything I do is fairly simple, and it's repetitious. By that I mean, once you learn the formula, once you learn the core principles of what I do, you'll do the same thing 50 years from now.
Yeah, I use my keyword that you taught me. For the whole last year. It works. It works. What's next for you in regard to your growth as an individual?
There's no next because I'm still involved in the next. It's a continuation. It's not like a separation and there's another one. Again, it's every day is linked to the whole. And so the things that I'm thinking about now, and in fact, it was really, I'm glad for one reason of coming is because I got a chance to sit down with Curtis and we talked about some things that it brings out the kid in me. He's talking about things about panning for gold and submarines and building this and all of a sudden it brings out the child in me and I say, gee, Curtis, we need to talk more because he kind of talks my language of, all the little toys that we can build and play with. And my wife shakes her head and thinks, you should be in the wheelchair like everybody else your age. And here I'm out there and building and creating. But that's part of the adventure and the excitement of being able to see that there's a lot to life. In fact, so much more that you really don't have time to turn around and look what's behind you. You're just too busy looking ahead. Mm-hmm. But a great part of that looking ahead is the looking ahead and being involved with people who are like similar in thought, similar in excitement about, gee, what can we do that will make life more exciting? And to me, I like to build things. I like to invent things. I'm always tinkering. I'm a tinker, and Curtis is a tinker. And it's just fun to, have sat down this morning and chit-chatted about some fun little things that everybody else would go, ah. But to me, it's like Rocco was saying, in about a month, I'm going to be sending him my submarine design from me floating around in the bay in Hilo.
That's great. That's great. Where can people find you and reach you? I know you have jamesw.demile.com.
That's the main thing. I don't give people my telephone.
Right. No, that's fine.
But I'm always available. I'm more than happy to talk to people. I tell people if they, I have a program that is for giving people information to help them. And I tell people if they become a member of my personal development program, which is $30, then this gives them access to all the structure of everything I do. Plus, I'll help them on a personal level as much as I can. I will actually make specialized personal CDs for them on personal growth. I work with a lot of people, cancer, dementia, I mentioned the stuttering case. I work in all kinds of areas of people who are interested that need some guidance from things that I do. Um, so, but also if they become part of Wing Chun Do, a member of the Wing Chun Do, then they have access to all this information.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, they don't need to be part of Wing Chun Do. But the reason that I have them join my personal development program, and in reality, I've had so many people contact me, and I've given them the password to it and never charged them or asked them to belong. And I tell them, well, if you feel you're getting something out of it, then become a member.
Right.
But at the same time, it's important that people can see that I'm just like them. I just want to live life, want to be happy. So I'm accessible. But not for stupidity. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'm not going to solve your problems. I'm not going to take your hand and take you through life. That's your responsibility.
Right.
But I will help however I can with any information. And so will Rocco at the Ambrose Academy. I mean, he's open to that. And we're thinking of different ways that people can communicate with us on a regular basis to access this information.
So going to jameswdemile.com.
jameswdemile.com.
Okay, or ambroseacademy.com for that matter.
Right.
Okay.
People are interested in the instructors program and how to get involved into it and all that there. Just for information, the Ambrose Academy, of course. If you contact me, I'll just reference you to the Ambrose Academy anyway. Even though I'm still part of it, don't get me wrong. Rocco and I are a team as far as today because I'm still alive and functioning. So I'll stay involved as much as I can. But he carries the primary responsibility of the teaching and the testing and all that, although I will involve myself in testing a lot of the basic key core principles. I'll help as best I can along with him in order to give the student an opportunity for my experience, but that's only at the instructor's level. Otherwise, I just got too many people that if a person can be an instructor, I know their level of sincerity, their interest. If they're just casually interested in the martial arts, I'm not interested in giving them the time only because I don't have that extra time. And there's just a million people out there who would want that. And right. I have to selfishly say, I really want to help people that show that they want to help themselves. Mm-hmm. Especially, selfishly, people involved in Wing Chun Do.
Right. Before I ask you the last question, I just want to acknowledge you for a moment. First of all, for being so generous with your time and coming to do this today. Yeah. This has been fantastic. For your sharp and analytical mind, for your dedication to excellence, your championing of growth in all facets and forms, your thought leadership, your focus, your wisdom, your lasting legacy, and above all, your passion for educating others. And so you told me last year that one of the biggest things you learned from Bruce Lee was to have a sense of passion. So, Sijo, I ask you now, what advice do you have for those listening who have a passion and want to get after it?
Well, you don't have to give them any advice because if they have a passion, it's going to be the driving force that will allow them to achieve it. The thing that I try to tell people is to have a passion, is to not have an interest. But if they really want to get something out of life, then try and find something they can have a passion for. Obviously, I have a passion for life. Wing Chun Do is just part of my overall picture of what I enjoy in life. I happen to be, really involved in Wing Chun Do, but at the same time, there are other things that I really get excited about. But I find that me, just generally, I have a passion for life because everything is challenging. Everything is, I can see, gives me such positive feedback when I get involved. But the average individual won't. So to me, it's being able to identify what makes you excited about life, or what do you think that if you got involved would give you a tremendous amount of personal satisfaction for having been involved, that would give you a feeling of having purpose in life, that would give you a feeling of satisfaction for having been born. That, of course, it could be martial arts, it could be, who knows what. You have to pick it out. But at the same time, a passion is what makes you stand out because it takes you and evolves you to a higher level because of the amount of effort and energy you put into it versus a person who doesn't have the passion. You know, it's like the person who is a gold medalist person who's doing the same kind of art but isn't a gold medalist. They're both doing the same thing, but one person has a passion for it, and therefore it takes them to a higher level because they're driven, because it's that kind of emotional importance. Whereas a lot of other people, they just enjoy doing it, but they don't have a passion. So, passion is a tricky word, but to me, it's an important part of, especially martial arts, to be like a champion. You have to have a passion for it, which means you get involved in the emotional side of training rather than just the physical side of training. And I'm a very emotional person, but not emotion that I lose control of. I'm very much in control of my emotions, but it's very focused, very linear, all moving to be happy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sijo. I cannot tell you how gracious I am for you coming here.
Glad it could.
Very, very appreciative of this, and especially since you have such a short amount of time that you're in town from Hawaii and everything. And by the grace of the universe, hopefully I can get out to visit you out there one time. That would be fantastic.
You never know. But yeah.
Excellent.
All your listeners out there, I don't understand all this, but I'm sure somebody's out there in the ether listening.
Yes, 100%, and they are better off for it. So thank you very much once again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Sijo James DeMile. And if you did, please share it across your social media platforms because word of mouth is absolutely huge. In fact, just last night, when attending Wing Chun Do school, a new student told me that they came to our school because they discovered the podcast on YouTube and were inspired to join. So, positively impacting others is the name of the game, and you sharing this episode and the others across your social media platforms is what really helps. So thank you all for doing that. And thank you to those who have emailed me with their thoughts and what resonated with them on the podcast. I love getting your feedback. And if you want to do the same, send an email to getafterit@therealjohnk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode of Get After It. But until then, you get after it.